Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're taking a deep dive into a pretty fascinating document.
Yeah.
It's called Mandate for Leadership: The Conservative Promise. And it's basically a blueprint for how conservatives envision America in 2025.
It covers a lot of ground.
Oh, yeah.
Everything from reforming government agencies to, reshaping social policy.
Yeah, and it gets really specific, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Like, we're not just talking about broad ideas
Yeah,
here.
no, it's like down to the nuts and bolts.
Yeah, we're talking about potential overhauls to the Department of Homeland Security and some pretty big shifts in how the government operates.
Right. And what we're going to focus on today is pages 500 to 600.
Okay.
This section gets into the nitty-gritty of how these changes might actually play out in the real world.
Exactly. And one of the things that really jumps out in this section is the focus on streamlining the federal bureaucracy.
Oh, yeah. They argue it's become way too bloated and inefficient.
Okay.
Too much power in the hands of unelected officials.
So less red tape, more efficiency. But what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, one proposal that stands out is splitting the Office of Management and Budget's resource management offices.
Okay.
These are basically the folks who manage the government's money.
Right.
They want to split these offices into smaller, more specialized units,
Okay.
and they want to put more political appointees in charge,
Interesting.
which suggests a stronger hand for the president in shaping policy.
So less power to career bureaucrats, more power to the president's team.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
What are the implications of that kind of shift?
Well, really depends on your perspective, I guess.
Right.
Supporters might argue that it makes the government more responsive to the will of the people,
Okay.
since the president is, elected.
Right.
But critics might worry about politicizing essential government functions,
Yeah.
potentially undermining the expertise of career civil servants.
Okay, so there's a balance there that needs to be struck.
Absolutely.
And it's not just about money management. They also want to shake up the Office of Personnel Management, or OPM.
Yeah, OPM handles federal hiring,
Right.
and they propose bringing it directly under the president's control.
Wow, that's a big change.
Yeah.
Giving the White House a much more direct role in shaping the federal workforce.
Yeah, and they're particularly concerned about something they see as a problem,
Okay.
which is the difficulty in distinguishing between strong and weak candidates in the current hiring process.
Right.
They point to a decades-old consent decree, which stopped the use of intelligence tests in federal hiring.
Okay.
This was done because of concerns about racial bias,
Right.
but they argue that it's actually made it harder to find the best people for the job.
That's a pretty controversial claim.
It is.
It raises questions about whether such a change would really improve things or potentially lead to less diversity in the federal workforce.
Yeah, and that's a key consideration throughout this whole section of the document.
Okay.
We see a lot of proposals aimed at reducing the size and scope of government, but the potential impact on different groups, minorities, the poor, federal employees.
Yeah,
It's something we need to unpack very carefully.
absolutely. And that's what we're going to do in this deep dive.
Yeah.
The document makes it very clear that they want to make government smaller and more efficient.
Right.
But what does that mean for the people who rely on government services?
Right.
Particularly those who are, struggling financially.
Yeah, that's a crucial question.
What?
The document doesn't shy away from advocating for streamlining welfare programs,
Okay.
emphasizing work requirements.
All right.
Supporters of this approach might argue that it encourages self-sufficiency and reduces dependency on government assistance.
Okay.
But of course, there's always the flip side.
Yeah.
Critics worry that such changes could actually make it harder for those who are already struggling to access essential services
Right.
and benefits.
So it's like a double-edged sword.
It could be, yeah.
Yeah. It seems like there's a lot of potential for both positive and negative impacts, depending on how these changes are implemented
Right.
and who they ultimately affect.
And that's what we're going to try to figure out in this deep dive.
Yeah.
The document lays out a vision,
Okay.
but how that vision translates into reality and who benefits or loses out is a complex question.
Speaking of complex questions, let's talk about the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS.
Okay.
This document suggests some pretty radical changes, including potentially dismantling the entire department.
It's one of the most eye-catching proposals, for sure.
Yeah.
They argue that DHS has become too big, too bureaucratic,
Okay.
ultimately ineffective in carrying out its core mission.
So what do they want to do?
They propose a soft closure of what they deem unnecessary offices
Okay.
and a much stronger focus on core functions.
Like what?
like border security.
Okay, so a leaner, meaner DHS.
Yeah, that's the idea.
But could that actually weaken our security in other areas?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
Supporters might say that by focusing resources on key areas like border control, we're actually strengthening our defenses where it matters most. But critics might point to the fact that security threats are interconnected
Right.
and argue that dismantling parts of DHS could leave us vulnerable in other areas.
It's a tough call.
It is a tough call.
And speaking of border security, the document suggests giving the Secretary of Homeland Security more authority to bypass legal requirements during a border crisis.
Yeah, that's a proposal that's sure to generate some debate.
What do you think about it?
Well, it raises some serious questions about checks and balances.
Right.
Supporters might argue that it's necessary to give the secretary the flexibility to act quickly in a crisis.
Okay.
But critics worry about potential overreach and the erosion of legal protections.
So again, it's about finding that balance
Exactly.
between security and individual rights.
And this tension between security and rights,
Yeah.
it runs through a lot of these proposals.
Yeah, and it's particularly important to consider the potential impact on minorities who might be disproportionately affected by stricter border control measures.
Yep.
Right? We can't just talk about efficiency and streamlining without also thinking about the human cost.
You got it.
Now, speaking of interesting debates within the conservative movement,
Yeah.
let's talk about the Export-Import Bank, or XOM.
Oh, yeah. This is where we see some internal disagreements.
Right.
The document actually presents two completely different viewpoints on EXO.
Really?
One side argues for shutting it down completely, claiming it's essentially corporate welfare that distorts the market
Right.
and primarily benefits large corporations.
So a classic free market
They
argument.
feel less government intervention.
But the other side defends XOM.
They do.
What do they say?
They argue that it's a vital tool for supporting American businesses.
Okay.
In a global economy where many countries engage in managed trade,
Right.
they say it helps to level the playing field and create jobs.
So it's a tough question.
It is.
You've got the principle of free markets on one hand,
Yeah.
and the realities of global competition,
Yeah.
and the need to support American businesses on the other.
It's a classic dilemma.
It is. And this debate has real-world implications for American workers in industries that rely on exports.
Absolutely.
The document acknowledges that closing XAM could lead to job losses in certain sectors.
Right.
So it's about weighing those trade-offs.
Between economic efficiency and people's livelihoods.
Exactly. And this is just one example of the many complex issues that this document grapples with.
Yeah, it's a lot to unpack.
We've just scratched the surface of what's in these 100 pages of mandate for leadership.
Yeah, and we're just getting started.
These proposed changes could have ripple effects across society, impacting everyone from federal employees to families struggling to make ends meet.
Absolutely, and that's why we're here.
Right, to break it all down and help people understand what's at stake.
Yeah, we need to examine these proposals carefully, consider the potential consequences, and listen to the perspectives of all those who might be affected.
It's not just about abstract ideas, it's about people's lives. All right, well, let's take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll delve deeper into some of the specific proposals for reforming government agencies and explore the potential implications for everyday Americans.
Sounds good.
Stay with us.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Before the break, we were talking about the potential impact of these conservative proposals on everyday Americans,
Right.
especially those who rely on government programs.
Exactly like how streamlining welfare programs and emphasizing work requirements
Yeah, exactly.
might impact those who are struggling to make ends meet.
Yeah, the document really advocates for a more self-sufficiency approach,
Oh,
arguing that work is the best path out of poverty.
right.
Supporters of this approach would say that it encourages personal responsibility
Right.
and reduces reliance on government handouts.
But critics might worry that that approach is a little bit too simplistic.
Yeah,
Like it doesn't take into account the really complex realities of poverty.
right.
Like what about people who face barriers to employment?
No, like what?
Like disabilities,
Okay.
lack of transportation, limited childcare options.
Right. Those are all very real barriers.
Yeah. And the document doesn't really address how those things would be addressed.
No, it doesn't get into a lot of detail about that.
So critics would say that without adequate support systems in place,
Right.
these work requirements could actually just push people further into poverty.
Yeah, make things worse instead of better.
Right. So it seems like the potential impact on the poor is a key area where
Definitely.
further analysis is needed.
Yeah, we need to look beyond the rhetoric and consider the practical realities,
Right.
How would these changes actually play out
On the ground, yeah.
for real people?
And this applies to a lot of the proposals in this document.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Let's talk about the proposed changes to the intelligence community.
Okay.
They seem really concerned about China's growing influence
Oh, yeah. It's a big theme in the document.
and also about China's technological advancements.
Right. They talk a lot about modernizing the intelligence community
Okay.
and potentially expanding intelligence sharing beyond the Five Eyes network.
Okay, now for our listeners who might not be familiar with that term,
Right.
the Five Eyes network is it's the intelligence alliance
Yeah.
between
Yeah.
the U.S., the U.K., Canada, Australia, and New Zealand.
Right. The main English-speaking countries.
Right, exactly.
So they're saying that those traditional intelligence alliances
Yeah.
might not be enough anymore.
In this new era of great power competition,
Exactly. We're in a different world now.
so they're looking to partner with other countries
Right.
who share our concerns about China.
Yeah. Countries that are also worried about China's rise.
So that could mean forging new alliances in the Asia-Pacific region.
Right. Places like Japan,
Right.
India,
Okay.
maybe even some European countries.
So that sounds like a pretty significant shift in U.S. foreign policy.
It is. It's a big deal.
Yeah. And it raises a lot of questions.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Like, will it actually strengthen our position?
Right.
Or could it lead to greater instability and mistrust?
Yeah, could it backfire?
Exactly.
Make things worse instead of better.
And it's not just about global alliances. They also want to see a more aggressive approach to counterintelligence,
Right.
particularly against China.
They're worried about China's attempts to steal intellectual property
Okay.
and infiltrate American institutions.
Right.
So they're calling for a more proactive approach to protecting U.S. technology and secrets.
So less reacting to China's moves
Yeah,
and more like anticipating and counteracting them.
exactly. It's a more assertive posture,
Okay.
driven by a sense of urgency about the threat that China poses.
All right, so let's switch gears back to domestic policy for a minute.
Okay.
We've talked about the proposed soft closure of certain offices within the Department of Homeland Security.
Right.
What are the potential implications of that move?
Well, the document argues that DHS has become too bloated, too bureaucratic, and that it's diverting resources away from its core mission.
So what do they want to focus on?
They want to streamline the department,
Okay.
focus on essential functions
Well, I agree.
like border security, immigration enforcement, counterterrorism.
Okay, so less bureaucracy,
Yeah.
more boots on the ground.
Yeah, that's the basic idea.
But as we discussed earlier, critics might question whether such a narrow focus could leave us vulnerable in other areas.
Right, because security threats are often interconnected.
Exactly.
So dismantling parts of DHS could have unintended consequences.
And it's not just streamlining DHS. They're even talking about completely dismantling the department.
I know, it's a pretty radical proposal.
Yes, starting over from scratch.
It would be a major shakeup of the federal government.
For sure, and it would generate a lot of controversy.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But it really highlights how committed they are to shrinking the size and scope of government.
Yeah, they see big government as the problem.
Right, and it raises the question of whether such a drastic overhaul would actually improve efficiency and effectiveness,
Right.
or potentially create more chaos and confusion.
It's hard to say for sure.
Yeah, it's a big gamble.
It is.
Speaking of controversy, let's talk about the document's stance on education.
Okay.
They're very critical of what they perceive as federal overreach in education.
Yeah, they want to see a return to more local control.
Right.
They argue that parents should have more say in their children's education,
Right.
and they're strong supporters of school choice initiatives like charter schools and vouchers.
And they believe that these programs give parents more options
Right.
and create competition, which can improve the quality of education.
Yeah, competition is good, they say.
But as we mentioned earlier, critics often worry that such programs could drain resources from public schools
Yeah, that's a big concern.
and exacerbate existing inequalities between wealthy and poor districts.
That's a valid point.
And it's not just about funding. They're also concerned about what they see as a progressive agenda in public schools.
Yeah, particularly on issues related to gender identity and sexual orientation.
All right, they push back against curriculum that they believe is inappropriate or goes against traditional values.
They want to see a more traditional approach to education,
Okay?
with a strong emphasis on parental rights and a back-to-basics curriculum.
So it seems like they're advocating for a return to what they view as core American values in education.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. We've spent the last two segments kind of unpacking this massive document mandate for leadership. We've talked about so many things.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
Everything from shrinking the federal bureaucracy
Right.
to reshaping education, tackling the China challenge, all kinds of stuff.
It's a big vision.
It is. So now I want to kind of zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
What does this all tell us about the conservative vision for America,
Oh, right.
as we head into 2025?
Well, I think one of the things that really stands out is this emphasis on individual empowerment,
Okay.
limited government, a return to traditional values.
Like a real focus on, shifting power away from Washington or
Exactly.
back towards, individuals, families, communities.
It's like they're trying to hit a reset button in a way.
Yeah, I get that sense too.
Go back to what they see as the fundamentals.
Yeah, like the country's veered off course.
Uh-huh.
The federal government's become too big, too intrusive, too disconnected
Right.
from the needs of everyday Americans.
And they see this mandate for leadership as a way to correct course,
Yeah,
to restore that proper balance between government and individual liberty.
right. So it's about reducing the regulatory burden on businesses,
Yeah.
empowering parents in education, promoting traditional family structures.
It's a vision that's deeply rooted in a particular set of values.
Okay.
Values like personal responsibility,
Right.
free markets, a strong national defense.
So it's a very clear worldview.
It is.
But as we've discussed, this vision also raises some important questions.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like, how will these changes impact those who rely on government assistance?
Right.
Will shrinking the federal government actually exacerbate existing inequalities?
Those are key questions, and the document doesn't always provide clear answers.
Right. And it's important to remember that this is just one perspective,
Exactly.
right? This is a snapshot of how a particular group of conservatives envisions the future.
It's not the only vision out there.
Right. And it's crucial to engage with this vision critically,
I think so.
to weigh the potential benefits and drawbacks,
Yeah.
and to really consider the perspectives of those
Right.
who might be affected by these changes.
Because ultimately, politics is about choices.
Yeah,
It's about the kind of society we want to create,
right.
the values we prioritize.
And this document lays out a very specific set of choices.
It does.
Choices that are sure to spark debate and discussion for years to come.
Oh, yeah, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Absolutely. And for our listeners, if you're intrigued by what you've heard today
Yeah.
and you want to delve deeper into mandate for leadership and explore these ideas further, we highly recommend checking out www.kemeticmind.com.
They've got a ton of great resources
Yeah, they do a lot of great stuff over there.
for understanding this document and really engaging in a thoughtful conversation about the future of America.
Yeah, it's a great place to continue the conversation
Absolutely.
and really deepen your understanding of this, this complex and crucial topic.
It's a big one.
It is. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did.
Me too.
Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep those minds engaged.